I'd like to welcome you to the first portion of the Windows workshop for learning Linux. Today, we're going to have a three-part session, and it's my little Wizard of Oz, settings and files and commands. Oh my. And as I said earlier, we have our team with us, except Orv Beach will not be here with us, but I'm going to be here and replacing Orv. And Sharan Kalwani is here and standing by for his presentation on files, the file structure of Linux. What we're going to do is we're going to be talking first about settings. What I've been trying to do is do a comparison between the different distributions and desktops and all the different options and the variations that they have. With Windows, we're pretty much have one option and we go with it. But with Linux, there are many options. We've already talked about different kinds of programs that do the same thing, the different kind of desktops. We have different distros that are created for different purposes. And so I thought today we would take a quick look at what does Linux offer in settings, take a look at the menu, find out where do you go to find settings, and compare some of the options. Now, in this short time, we're not going to take a look at every possible option, because next month when we do our presentation on customizing the desktops, the different presenters will be going to these different options. But I picked a number of ones that I think will help you see that there are a variety of ways that people put things together. We're going to talk about, menus, the setting menu in general, and then talking about the backgrounds, changing appearance, sound, setting your default or preferred application, and how you create new users. I'm going to use a number of different distributions, and they have their own kind of default desktops so that you get a chance to see. I guess the focus would be is how much do you want? If you want something very minimalistic, not a lot of options, there's a distro and desktop for you. If you want to have the ability to really go crazy in customizing and changing settings, then we'll let you know that there are ones that have it. So we're going to start out with Ubuntu. And this is the main desktop for Ubuntu. It always has the panel on the side. We kind of showed that when Sharan did his presentation on Ubuntu on the GNOME desktop. And what you do is you have a strip down the side, and the checkerboard or the tic-tac-toe board at the bottom is where you click to get your applications. And in Ubuntu, it's all alphabetical. So I had to go to the second screen. And on the second screen, I find the one for settings. When we click the one for settings, you will see that Ubuntu now gives you a choice of a lot of options. This has not been always the case with Ubuntu. Ubuntu used to have a very limited amount because the people said, you don't really need to be making all these changes. In fact, there's enough of these that I have to go to a second screen. But you can be able to see on here all the different available settings that you have for Ubuntu, all the way from dealing with Bluetooth, notifications, setting up online accounts, power, your mouse, your removable media, universal access, date and time. So all these are available for you to make changes, and all of them weren't there in the beginning. So we're going to be looking at, like I said, just focusing on a number of ones so we can compare. So our first one is going to be on backgrounds. As you see, not a lot of backgrounds. Some to choose, but not a lot. But up in the top right-hand corner, you should be able to see that there is a button, kind of hard to see at first, that you can add your own pictures. And then you can create whatever background you want. If we go to appearances, this is one that you'll see is very limited. You have 3 choices, the light and the dark and a standard, which is kind of like half and half in between. And you have a couple of options for that dock that you saw on the left-hand side of the screen. But I want you to note that you don't have a lot. When we jump down to sound, Ubuntu and GNOME's thought is we've got one screen that has what you need. At the top is the volume level, and right now it only has system sounds. But if you have other things that are going to be running sounds on your computer, like right now Zoom is running on my computer, and I would have a volume control for Zoom. You also have your output, input, and then you'll be able to pick and make adjustments to that. You also have some alert sounds that you can make, which if you wanted a sound that would be like a bark if you wanted it. So right, all in one page right there. When we come to default applications, you get 6 choices, the basic ones that you have for the web, mail, calendar, and each of them, just like with Windows, has a default, but you can use anything that you want. Whichever one you want, you just come in here and make that change, and then whenever you open something with that, it would automatically do that program. Adding users, you can see that this is the user I have for my VirtualBox, and it gives you the chance that you can change it to automatic login without a password, and you can change the password. You can edit the name of the person. If you want to add another user to your Linux, there's a button up at the top that says Add User, and as simple as this, you decide whether it's a standard user or an administrator user, and then you have their name and whatever username they want. Now, what's interesting is that in the GNOME, it will let them pick it rather than you have to pick up a password. You can choose that says when they first log in with whatever password you might give them, then they can change that. And so that's kind of a unique thing that you'll see just for the GNOME one. Next, I want to move on to Mint. Mint with the Cinnamon desktop, and take a look at what they have. Now, with Cinnamon, you have a icon, a shortcut already set for you. So we don't even have to go anywhere deep into the menu. But if you look at this, you'll see that this is one of the distros that divides up settings into 2 categories. You can see the one on the center row that's called administration, and the one for preferences. So they divide those up, and what happens there is the ones that are listed under administration have to have admin permission to change. And we know that in Windows world that you had to have admin permissions to change anything that would affect the computer and all the users. If it's just something that's affecting you, doesn't require an admin password. So they have those listed under preferences. So that's just kind of like gives you an idea of how they divide things up. One of the other things you can always do in Linux, and now you can do in Windows too, is you can use the box at the top and just type in a search for settings, and it would come to that same one that I'm going to right now. So here's the settings for Mint Cinnamon, and you can see a whole different approach. Instead of just being a verbal written one with text down the side, this has got icons, makes it a little bit more appealing. And when I look at this, I didn't do a match for match, but obviously there are a few more setting changes that you can make in Mint Cinnamon that you can't easily make in Ubuntu. And in fact, there's another row on the second screen that has the administration ones. So you have a wide variety of options that you can mess with, especially with Mint and Cinnamon. So let's go through our comparison groups. And here's the one on backgrounds. And the first thing you notice is more information about the background of the size, and more actual backgrounds. And in addition, if you look on the left-hand side up at the top corner, you will see that there are 3 different categories. There are Linux Mint backgrounds, because remember, Linux Mint we talked about has 3 different versions: a Cinnamon, a Mate, and an XFCE. So there are backgrounds that are universal to Linux Mint. And then we've got the backgrounds from the current version and the previous version. And so there's 2 other folders. They also give you an easy link to your picture folder. So if you want to get a background from there. So quite a big range. Plus, if you want to add any more at the bottom from a thumb drive or somewhere else, you can do that. When it comes to the appearance, you can't get much bigger than what Mint Cinnamon can do. This distro offers you an abundance. Here is an example when we're talking about your folder looks. You can see all the different ones. And if you notice at the very bottom, there's a little triangle, which means there's even more. So you can find a color of your folders when you see them in your file manager for whatever you want. It's all sorts of colors. The same goes true for when you want to talk about your window border and your buttons. All of this plus more at the bottom, because there's another triangle down there. And so you have a wide variety of options with Mint Cinnamon. It's kind of one of the features that why a lot of people like the Mint Cinnamon, because of all the options. And even when it comes to the last part, when you're talking about your desktop and main window, you can see that we have all ranges from dark to light. Plenty of different options, more so than you can get with Ubuntu. If we jump to sounds, Ubuntu decides they want to break it up into separate windows. So I've got 2 different screenshots that you've got the output and the input, and all the changes. So when you hit the output, it shows you all the devices you have available for your output, or if you have for your input. So that kind of is a little bit of a more elaborate way. And then down at the bottom, you have the settings for whichever device you're configuring. You also see that there are sounds, applications, and settings. This you didn't find in Ubuntu, and this is more like what we can remember from Windows way back in the XP days, that you can have, you don't have to, you can have background sounds for all the different things you do. Like we remember when you click to open a window, close a window, click, this and that. So you can come in here and do that a lot and make those changes. When we talk about preferred applications, notice you have more choices in Cinnamon Mint than we did. We had 6 basic choices back in Ubuntu, and here we've got, I think it's 12 or 13. You can even, this is, I thought was interesting, you can even go down and choose your preferred calculator. And as a reminder, with Linux, it comes with every probably software that you need to do your general work, but you're allowed to have whatever you want. So when you come in, then you can make the changes to whatever choice you want through here. When we talk about adding users, this one has a little bit different because I wanted to point that out. Even though it's got me or my user and the same thing as before, I want you to notice down here at the bottom that we have groups, and you can customize individual users to have access to certain parts of the computer. This person has access to be an admin, use the CD that's on the laptop, to be a admin of the LP, sharing, sudo, being able to be a super administrator. So this gives you a lot of customization of individual, not just 2 choices, standard, administrator. You can change that. If we want to add new users, then you can see that we have the same thing, standard administrator, and then passwords. But notice that with Linux Mint Cinnamon, you are restricted to what characters you can and can't have, and you must also have lowercase, numbers, and characters. So Mint wants to make your password very secure. Moving on to Manjaro. Manjaro is an Arch-based distribution, and this is going to be running the XFCE desktop. And again, when you go to it, you can see that there is 2 choices, settings and system. System would probably be the same as the administration on the other distros, things that affect the system, and then settings would be one for you. You can also do a search box and just search for settings. Here are the settings for the regular user, and you can see that doesn't seem to have as much as what the Mint had, the Mint Cinnamon one, but quite a number of choices. You also have a second option. This one is for Manjaro. A lot of times, like we said, when I showed you the pictures for the background of Mint Cinnamon, there were settings that were for, pictures that were for Mint, and then for Mate, or the Cinnamon, I'm sorry. Here you have the same thing. There are settings that go with your desktop, like the XFCE, and there are settings that go specifically for the distro, which is Manjaro in this case. So you can see that there are different choices for that. This is where you go to find the user and your keyboard. If you go back, you can see that that's where most of the other ones are. And what I like about these, as opposed to the Ubuntu one, is they are put in categories, and so that it's easier to find what you're looking for than in a big, long list. Backgrounds, again, quite a good selection of backgrounds. At the very bottom, you can add more. This one also allows you to create a slideshow so that your background changes every so often. One other thing, depending on which distro and desktop you have, in the bottom right-hand corner, each desktop can have a different background. I do that on mine just so it kind of helps me remember which one I'm on. But that's difference. I think also you'll find out that in the XFCE, even though there's been talk that it's kind of like the bottom level of our desktops because it's lightweight or whatever, it still has quite a lot of customization in it. Appearance, this one has limited. As you can see on the side for the styles, there's only about a dozen compared to what we saw in Mint. Some people would say, you don't need all of those. Well, in the Linux world, we have choices, and we have lots of choices. And on the right-hand side, you can see the ones for the icons. A little bit harder to tell how it's going to look as opposed to the other one. So again, this helps you say, I like the way I have options that are in the Mint one, so maybe I want to use Mint and have more of those. When we go back to the tools, the sound, you can see that they've changed theirs. They've still got the input output. They've got a tab for recording and playback and configuring. So some people feel this is awkward because you've got 5 different ones, whereas with the Mint, you had 2 different screens, and with Ubuntu, you had 1. Interesting enough, in terms of preferred applications, you only end up with 4 choices. That's even less than what Ubuntu gave you. But some people say these are the only main ones that you need to worry about. You can go through and run whatever you want before. And users, same thing. There's my user down at the bottom. If you want to add a user, delete a user, it's down at the bottom. And when you do this one, very similar, just give it a username, password, and you're ready to go. Some people like it that you have more ability to customize that user with the Cinnamon one. Moving on to Fedora, which is another distribution, and Fedora also has the GNOME as their main one. So you can see this part is the same as if we were back in the other. Now, the only difference I want to point out is that Fedora, their screen is totally blank to begin with. There is no toolbar on the side, just the word activities at the top. And so you have to hit the activity button because you can see how it's underlined in blue. The strip of favorites shows up on the side, and then the programs show up. And that's just, you know, a flavor of the GNOME. With Ubuntu, they make that dock permanent, so it's always there. So we have the same settings in there. And when we go to that, you can see that looks just like what we had in Ubuntu, because that's more or less the GNOME design for settings. And again, it takes 2 screens to see all the ones we have. And like I mentioned before, all in not even in alphabetical order, but by categories, I guess. Backgrounds, few more than what they had in Ubuntu, not as many as in Mint. So it's, you know, that's not a big choice, deal break for some people, because you can always add your own later on. Okay, we go to appearance. Nothing there. That's because in Fedora, with their version of GNOME, there's no option for appearances. You're stuck with what you have. Remember, in Linux world, there's always options and always other things. So what you have to do is you have to go out and install an app, a program for customizing your applications. And this is the way it was in Ubuntu a while back, and people didn't like it. They said, I don't like being restricted. I can't make enough changes. So somebody designed a program that would work with it. Everybody went out and got it. It was called GNOME Tweaks. And Ubuntu then, I guess, decided that they didn't like everybody going out and adding stuff to their distro. So my Ubuntu added those. With the Fedora, they didn't, but all you have to do is go out and get a program called GNOME Tweaks, and then just added it to my utilities. And when you get that, now you have the ability to make changes to your appearance and a few other things that are listed on this one. In fact, there's going to be another one for backgrounds too. This one's a little bit different because you've got to do a drop-down menu. Here's when to get your other pictures. I don't like this one as well. You have to go through your menu, and you don't always see exactly what you're going to get for picture until you've got it. All the remaining options are exactly the same as what we saw in Ubuntu and GNOME, because it's the mostly GNOME one. So we're done with that. But I wanted you to see the big thing was that Fedora did not have that option for continuing your appearance and stuff. So you had to go out and get it like you used to in Ubuntu. Whereas with something like Mint, it just came all with everything to begin with. Elementary is another one of the new modern looking ones. When you go to that desktop, it was a little bit tricky at first because their icon for settings was just a toggle on and off switch, which is what you do. So, you know, that made it a little bit harder. But again, you can do the settings. So when we go to the settings, here is settings. And what you'll notice right away is not as many, because elementary people said, we want to be a more simplistic type of distro. We don't want to cause a lot of confusion and stress by all these options to change. The basic ones are there, but not enough as the same as before. Backgrounds, a few choices. It can import. Appearance. Think about what we've seen before. Very little choices here. Very small, simplistic sound, 2 tabs. Output, what do you want to use? Volume for it, not much else. Output or input, same thing. You have a few more choices depending on what kind of device you have. Same basic 8 default choices. Pretty much the same with the making a user. If you want to make a new user, same difference. Jumping to move real quickly on, Solus. Again, this one has system settings, system tools, utilities. So they kind of divide things up even more. Here are the budgie desktop settings. Notice that there are not as many choices as in others. You can still make some changes. Most of the changes are simple drop-down boxes with not much of a preview until you actually use it. So again, you can see here for the other choices for icons, very, very little choices, but some people like that. There's a choice, you have a choice for your desktop, either dark or light. And I've turned off the dark, but it's still dark. It didn't change it. And the remaining options are exactly the same as what we saw in Ubuntu GNOME. So there's no reason to show that. But I wanted you to see how with the elementary, it's more simple and not as many. And the last one I'm going to run through is we talked about this LinuxFX distribution a few months ago. I found out it has now gone paid. There is a new version that has more support maybe some more features. It's called Windows FX, but that one is a purchased one to get. You can still get the Linux FX for free. And this is the one, remember, that mimics Windows 10. The idea is to make it so easy for a Windows user to move to Linux because everything kind of looks and feels much the same. With the FX, it has the icon for control panel up on the top on the favorites. This one is sort of based on the Cinnamon from the Mint days we just looked at. So you have your control panel, but as you can see, it doesn't look like the Windows 10 control panel as much as the old one. If you go back to the Windows 7 days and go to one of the settings, you'll say, oh, that looks a lot like that. And so again, they have the choices. May not have as many as some of the distributions because I only need one screen because there's just one administrative one for a user. Many, many, many more backgrounds. They overloaded on the backgrounds. As you can see, this is the category for wallpapers on the left, but you can see that there's backgrounds and then there's a category called joy and lines and moonlight. And so they give you a lot more. My guess is they're trying to mimic the fact that you can go out and get tons of different background themes and stuff for Windows. So they provide a whole bunch with you there. They do a little bit different with their drop down, similar to what Mint did, but not as many choices. Same here, a few of the choices for your desktop background. And the remaining are the same as we saw in Mint Cinnamon. All right, there's more to show. My MX Linux that I use has more options than I have even gotten to find for customizing my MX and my XFCE. As you look through it, you have the choices of what you're going to do. I'll jump now and ask Judy if there's anything that I need to address right now before we move on.
Let me look. Sharan has Linux Mint Mate on her laptop. There's a new version. If she goes to that new version, does she have to put in all her preferences, settings, and apps again?
She should not, because all of your preferences and stuff are kept in a hidden folder in your home directory. And that's why it's great, because if you have your, and we've talked about a little bit about that when you set it up, your home directory separate from your operating system, it doesn't happen. So depending on whether she has it in one or the other, if she does an upgrade, it should not affect it. If she does a new install, I had to do a complete install because all of my settings were in my home partition. When I loaded that new one up, all of my bookmarks came back, all that stuff, because that's stored in there. So if she does one of the upgrades, she should be okay and not have to redo all of that.
Gil would like to know, what is the Linux equivalent of the Windows autocomplete function?
Same difference. You know, it's more or less really comes in with your general computer. I type and it just auto completes if I want, but I use that mostly with the you know, in your browsers, and that's part of the browser settings and not as much for Linux.
Okay, Murray says oh, no, that's a comment. Hold on. Boom. Oh, that's it. The rest of them are comments.
Okay, well, you know, if you have any other comments or questions, you know, throw them in for afterwards. We can talk about that. But the whole idea was to show you we have many options and variety of choices, and it's up to you which one you like. I like all of the extra features of changes that Mint has in my MX. Some people say, I don't want so many choices. I like the Solus or the elementary way to do it. All right, so what we'll do right now is we'll tell Sharan that he can start sharing and take over, and he's going to be talking to us about the file structure of Linux and how it's a little bit different than what you're used to in Windows, but it's not, you know, there's nothing with it at all.
Okay, so let me share my screen. Okay, do you see something which looks like Linux file structure and systems?
You're looking good.
Okay, thank you. So actually, I prepared two separate presentations, one Linux file systems on the outside and Linux file systems on the inside. So depending upon the depth of questions, we can switch to that inside one later. So you can see all the muck that goes on underneath the covers so that the Linux file system can, demonstrate why it's very versatile. So let me just move to the next screen out here. So what we'll talk about is in really 3 parts, where I'll talk more about part 1 and somewhat about part 2. And then depending upon the questions, we can jump to part 3, which is all the internal stuff that I talked about. Why do I mention the internals? Because sometimes if you have an issue that needs to be resolved, the resolution will make references to, well, what kind of file system setup you have. And if you understand a little bit about the internals, it makes a big difference. But most of the time, you won't have to worry about that. So let me move on forward out here. So file management. Now, the biggest thing about Linux is the way the files and directories are organized. Okay, so as you heard, John mentioned earlier, home file system and stuff like that. The key to the Linux layout is that there is only a single structure, and that's called the root file system, typically represented by a slash symbol as a loner symbol. The root, everything goes, it's a tree structure. Some people will call the Linux file system a tree structure because when it was conceived of, people had all sorts of non-standard arrangements for files. Programs were separate, data were separate. There was no concept of a home. So many other operating systems were there. And they came up with this tree structure, which was inspired by an operating system at MIT. And since then, other operating systems, including Windows, has sort of adopted that. In that tree structure, you have the root. And then within that root, you have several directories. Now, we'll get into how this can grow and shrink and expand. However, imagine one large disk and you have a root directory out there. And this contains all the information on how things are organized underneath the covers. On the top, you'll see a bunch of directories like bin directory, dev directory, etc directory, and the home directory, which has been alluded to. This is typically where users are granted a directory that when they log in, this is where they automatically are positioned and everything is referenced from their home directory. For example, a user Larry or user Sam, these two are directories and they'll be inside this home directory. And at the same level as the home directory are all these other directories, which I'll talk about: libraries, processes, Scratch or temporary directory, USR or user directory, where typically they'll put a lot of utilities, executables, reference files that programs may use. And under that user directory will be another directory like a bin directory, or your actual packages that are there. They'll all be sitting out here. For example, the graphical user interface is called X11. So it'll have its own directory out here, and all the executables will be underneath the directory out here, so that they'll reference compilers, packages, third party, usually go under user bin. And they've actually found that they don't want to restrict themselves to user bin. Bin is for binary. They've created more beyond this. And nowadays, it all depends upon the package, and you can select whether to pop everything inside user bin or in /var for variable, where they can create more directories and they can place more executables. For example, in the user, there's a local directory, so /user/local, and there you can put other executable codes, binary, libraries, miscellaneous files. So this is the structure that one has to keep in mind when dealing with the Linux file system. And because it's so flexible, people over the years have placed packages in different locations. And nowadays it's all customizable. But in the past, one had to remember which package goes where, what. And in the future, what they're trying to do is create another directory, which I didn't show here because it's only partially caught on, called /opt for optional. So they say there should be a minimal set, and then everything that you add will go in optional /opt, and then it looks a lot like this /usr, X11 bin, etc., and so on, but it's all parked in the op, and there's a growing movement to put everything out there. So let me continue, and I think I'll take questions at the end because I can't really see the chat right now from where I am. Now, let me say a little bit more about each of those directories that I mentioned in the top picture out there. The root directory. This is where everything works, and we all often call it /, and if you're British, you'll call it /. Apparently, they like to be a little bit more descriptive in their use. We just say /. There's a very famous website called /dot, where they often talk about tech issues. So this was inspired by this /. So it's the logical entry point for any Linux file system. As I mentioned, all directories start from there. All distros, everything, they start from there. And from there, everything begins. Now, just like John pointed out, the home file system, it's usually recommended that you have that separate. And it is possible to have a separate home partition, which is not part of the original root partition. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes, the concept of mounting. In Windows, all partitions actually have a letter named to it, like C drive, D drive, E drive, F drive, so on, up till Z. I'm not sure what they do after Z. I've never gotten that far. And all of those are really physical partitions. Same way, directories can also be partitions, and then they are mounted all on the root file system. So the home file system can be mounted. It might be a separate partition, might be a separate disk. Often that's the case. And then once the Linux distro is booted up, it boots up to the root file system. And then there you can mount the /home so that it can always be separate. This way you can change operating systems and not interfere with any of the stuff that is in your area, your home area, or the user home areas, stuff like that. Now, the root file system comes with special privileges, and in Linux and Unix, we have the concept of what we call the root user, who is supreme, and they can do anything they want, including destroy the system, which is why you rarely want to grant root to just about anybody. It should always be reserved for the sysadmin, and they usually know what they're doing. But there's good reason for root to have all those special privileges and powers so that they can make a lot of dynamic changes. And utilities that are usually only available to the admin, they're parked in the root file system. And let me just show you where that typically is. Remember this root bin? That's usually where root bin and /bin or /etc for miscellaneous. That's where typically the admin or root user will have their utilities out here, because they're always associated with the Linux operating system, and that's at the root file system or root partition. So that's about the root user who has power and privileges to do anything to that directory, and then everybody else lives in their home directory or their package directory. And if they need to make any changes, then they will often request root to do that for them. Okay, let's move right along to the next directory that was in the picture there. And that was the bin/bin directory. This is where in the old days of Unix and Linux, most of the common commands were parked in bin. And it's not just the root that had their own utilities there. It was also a lot of common other commands that were there, like the copy command and stuff like that. It would be out there. It was only when the number of utilities grew and the partition wasn't big enough, then they created that /usr/bin and put other commands out there. And then even that started growing short. And that's why they had the /opt, and it's been growing ever since. There is one other interesting directory that's very, very special. And if you log on to your Linux distro and go to the root directory by using the change directory command, and then just list the storage there with the ls command, you'll notice a directory called boot, which only exists in the root file system. This is where key files that are used to bootstrap the Linux OS are placed, and configuration files specific to that OS are placed. This gives you the idea that in the boot partition or boot directory, usually it's pretty small, maybe a couple of 100 gig. Nowadays, we have terabyte file systems, so a couple 100 gig is not much. If you go into that directory by doing a change directory, cd command, cd /boot, when you preface everything with / and then the directory and then the other directory, that's called a fully qualified path name. So you can change directory to that, and if you list the storage, you'll notice Linux OS images there, and usually they're just a few, maybe the current one and the previous one, and you might even find a future one that they experiment with, that they keep parked out there, and then when the system is available only to the admins, they might use this boot directory to boot that new Linux OS to test it out. But that's where you'll find the files necessary for the operating system to boot. Whenever a machine is cold started, like a server or your own desktop or laptop, it actually expects the root file system to be there, and it'll look for the /boot directory. It has a rudimentary file system before it loads the main one, and it uses that to look for the Linux OS image so that it can bring that into memory, and that will start allowing multiple users to use the system. Another directory that is used 99% by the operating system is /dev, which is short for devices. This is a unique concept for which the creators of Unix and Linux have gotten a lot of awards, where in the old days, accessing devices involved all sorts of contortions and special ways to get at that. And the people who designed the Unix and the later inspiration Linux realized that all the devices that you're talking to, the printer, the network, the disk drive, the screen display, any device out there, are essentially nothing but stream. They're like files. You're sending a bunch of bytes to them. They might send you a few bytes back. So conceptually, they thought of it that, isn't it like a file? You're writing to a file or reading to a file. So what if we treat all devices as simple files? So they came up with this directory /dev device, and inside that, partitions, disk drives, screen displays, network displays, printers, communication devices, they all have their own directories, and inside those directories are special files that when the Linux operating system touches them, it's actually communicating with that device. When it looks at that special file, then inside that special file is information that tells the Linux OS, I have to go to such and such hardware location in order to talk to the device. That is the beauty of it. And so from the outside, we will see something. If we go to that directory, change directory, cd /dev or device, and do a list store there, the regular ls command, we'll find device names like printer or LP for line printer, or net0 or SD1 for SCSI disk 1, and things like that, short mnemonics, which are all the devices for which the Linux OS has been configured or are present on your system, and then interrogating them whenever the Linux operating system opens these directories or files. It will tickle a special routine inside the Linux OS, which will allow it to go to that device to do further communication. And you can't really harm it, because these are only accessible by root. You can maybe read it, and when you do try to read it, list the contents. Just be careful, because you might be, for example, there's a special file there, MEM, for the memory. So if you say display the contents of /dev/MEM, you're actually going to tell the operating system, go to the memory and read the entire contents and dump it on my screen. So you'll see lots of zeros and ones or weird characters come across your screen. But that illustrates the beauty of this device/device file system that allows Linux to treat everything like a file and simply do read and write to it so that it can communicate with that. There's even a file there for your monitor or model. It might be called Mon0 or Mon1 or Screen0, Screen1. Every Linux distro does its own things, but it does realize, and these are special files. So it uses that same /dev directory to communicate with your screen, for example. So that's the special arrangement that is there, and it's treated like a file, so it's part of the file system. Now let's move on to more regular files. There's another top level directory called etc, which actually has miscellaneous files. That's why it's called etc. And again, in the old days, typing on the keyboard didn't encourage too many long names or letters. That's why you find very short and cryptic commands so that they could type it quickly and get to where they wanted. So all the miscellaneous files are in /etc. Most of these miscellaneous files are configuration files, not just for Linux, but for a whole variety of third-party packages. They typically are parked and placed in etc. Then comes the home directory. Now, this is a directory right now, and today, in practical terms, this directory is actually a separate disk or partition. We'll talk about mounting a little later. But everyone, when they get an account on Linux, they get a directory with their login name parked in /home/ the username, whatever a directory account they were given. For example, you know, I was given a login name with my first initial last name. So if I went to that computer, /home/s_Kalwani would be my home directory. And there would be many other directories and folders and files that I would have created, including my preferences will also be out there. And that's where I would find stuff. Typically, this is a separate disk partition. So it's separate from the Linux OS piece. And whenever the Linux boots up, it will ensure that it has a home directory. And then it will do special things to mount a separate disk and say the starting point for that disk is /home. For example, in Windows, this could be D:/home or D drive or something. But we don't use letters here. We actually use directory names as the starting point for different partitions. And then the /lib or libraries. These are commonly used routines that are used by many other programs, including the bin, including the boot, etc, and all, where they expect /lib to be present, so they can call upon it during runtime execution. What other directories are there in the root? This is an important point. We haven't gone through all of them. There's /mnt. This is typically just a directory, and its sole purpose in life is whenever you do a, let's say, a removable media of some kind, like a CD-ROM or USB stick, or maybe even a special device, for example, a biomedical device, then you can use the hardware interface, and then it will be detected by Linux, and it says, all right, I have to treat it like another file, but it's not in the device file out there. So it will then use this directory to connect to that device, like the CD-ROM or USB stick, and then it will then invoke a routine and access that device by creating a directory under /mnt for mount, and thereafter it'll refer to that device through that directory name. So that's how that works. So mount is there, and in fact, mount can be used to connect many different devices or even many different portable hard drives or things like that, or a dozen USB sticks, as many USB ports you got, and it'll all show up as maybe MNT, CD-ROM 1, CD-ROM 2, things like that. Linux OS will know what to do with there. And then, of course, there's the /root. That's a directory, and it's on the /root file system. And this is the root user's home directory. The root user is a special user that has all the privileges. It has its own home directory in /root, and nobody else is expected to occupy that because they'll have their own specific routines and stuff like that in /root. And then like /bin and /usr bin, they discovered they needed more admin utilities. Then they created /sbin, another directory. And these are only commands for the system admin. The reason it's called sbin is for system binaries, or S was super user binaries. And the average user will not reference any files or use the executable programs in sbin. And then almost all Linux distros and Unix distros, they also have a TMP directory inside the root partition, and this is scratch. That means it's temporary usage. It might put something there. When it's done with it, it'll blow it away. If you shut down the system and there's stuff left there, there's no guarantee it'll be there when you boot up the system. These are 100% temporary files. However, I've noticed it hasn't stopped people from parking stuff there. And the reason they park stuff there is typically /tmp being used by the operating system, which has to shuffle a lot of programs in and out of memory, will use temp to temporarily park stuff. And the temp partition or a chunk of the disk drive that it uses is usually quite large. That's why it's tempting for many people to park stuff there, saying, oh, okay, this is a nice big chunk of real estate. Let me park it there and I'll retrieve it later, only to discover it's gone. And well, it's not always gone. It regularly cleans it up. Sometimes the cleanup is once a week or something. But temp is what a lot of people or utilities use to park temporary scratch files. And then I mentioned about the USR, short for user directory. This has nothing to do with the home directory, but this is where they put common programs that can be shared. And again, it's a directory that's created on the root partition where they'll park things that are common to lots of other places. And I think I explained a little bit about the history. In the old days, the /bin was sufficient. When that was no longer sufficient, then they created another directory on another partition called the USR and put all the other programs there. And then the other thing is there's a VAR, which is short for variable directory, also under root. And this is where utilities and packages put things like log files. So it's a separate partition, a separate chunk of disk that is mounted on the variable. And this is where they put things like login attempts, or who's logged in here, or what messages were received from other computers and things like that. All logging information usually goes into the /var. This is also where they create a special directory called spool. And usually that's connected to the printer. Many people want to print stuff at the same time. Then they'll send it to the printer. The printer will then take the data, park it in /var/spool, and maybe the printer name, printer 0, printer 1, and temporarily park it there. And then when it's done printing, it'll clean it out from there. So all the log files or things that grow over time, they go in the /var. And good practice requires that this also be a separate partition. That means not the same part of the disk that root is occupying, but a directory on that. And then they mount another partition of the disk that is located at VAR, so that all the log information goes to a separate chunk of disk and doesn't fill up the partition that belongs to root. Okay, now the USR directory, and like I said, this is was created later. It's a secondary hierarchy for all sorts of data In the old days, you know, the source code used to be placed out there, but that grew bigger and bigger. So now they have a separate directory for that. But it'll have things like other utilities that could not fit in /bin. So they'll pull it in /usr/bin. Miscellaneous files that are need to be included. For example, preferences. Skeleton preferences files are sometimes placed in /include. If you compile a lot of programs, then many header routines are put in /include and stuff like that. And then a libraries file. This is the library files that are used by the executables that typically are parked inside /usr/bin. So all the contemporary directories that these executables need, user lib, user sbin, user share, user local bin, and stuff like that, all of that is placed in the USR directory. So it's a secondary. Often you might have commands that you expect to be in /bin, but because /bin became too big or not big enough, they've now been moved to /usr/bin, which typically is another partition of another second or third disk drive on your system. And then finally, the last one, /opt, which in the last 20 years has become part of the Linux file system, where all the extra packages that were not part of the original operating system, core operating system, it's all parked in /opt. And it'll have a structure very similar to the /usr partition. You'll have a /opt bin, /opt library, /opt, all sorts of include and stuff like that. Okay, let me just pause here for a second, and then I'll start talking about the home directory. So we're sort of like about halfway through the Linux file system structure. And we'll do a few commands. So when you log in, you're automatically placed in your home directory. And in order to see what's in your, or what is the name of your home directory, you usually will type very short cryptic commands, but the most common one would be pwd, which stands for print current working directory, or wherever you happen to be and you don't know where you are because there's just a single prompt like a dollar symbol before that, but you're not sure where you are. You just do a pwd. It'll tell you the full path name, whatever it is, /home, /user login account, /whatever. It'll tell you all about that. And there's a whole bunch of other commands that you can typically use. The pwd command I talked about just now. df stands for disk free. So to see how much disk space is available, it actually will report all the partitions that are visible to Linux, a second, third, fourth disk drive, all of them, how much is configured and how much is free on it. When you want to go to a directory, which might be on a different partition, you always use the cd command, and then you specify the complete path name. We'll talk about absolute and relative path names in a second, but you specify cd and then the directory that you want to go to. If you just type cd command without any options, it assumes you want to go to your home directory, and it'll automatically, when you're logged in, it knows what your home directory is. And if you've navigated your way anywhere else, just typing a cd in a terminal window will always take you to your home directory. Now, every directory inside a Linux file system has two special directories, and they have a name. The ... when you say cd space ... then it'll move to the directory above it. Of course, if you reach root itself, it'll refer to itself. But if you're in some deep directory somewhere on a different partition, you can always type cd space ... and then it'll go to the one directory level above. The ls command is a very common command that we use, and it has tons of options. If you just type ls, it'll just give you the names of the files and directories in wherever you happen to be. If you type ls-l, L stands for long listing. So it'll give you a very long listing, the name of each file, the timestamp on the file, the permissions of the file, the size of the file, a long display. If you add the -a option, -a means all files, including hidden files. Hidden files inside of Linux have a prefix of a dot before them. So if you just did an ls or ls-l, it'll show you all the visible files but exclude the hidden files, the ones that started with dot. But if you do ls-a, it'll show you all the visible files as well as the hidden files. If you do ls-la, then it'll give you a longer listing. So for the hidden files, it'll actually show you the ownership, permissions, timestamp, and other relevant information about it. And of course, you will be working on different files at different points of time, and modifications are different. Sometimes you like to know which is the oldest file, which is the most recent file. Then you can do a list store, ls is for list store, and supply the -t option, and it'll sort it by time. You can sort by different parameters of time, latest, first, and things like that. If you add the -r option, then it'll use the recursive method to say, all right, let's reverse the sort order and give them the oldest first. So if you do ls-ltr, it'll go by the time and in reverse order. So it'll show you all the oldest first. The default is the latest first. And then, of course, there are many other Linux file system user commands. Copy, cp for copy. It's always, copy this file from here to there. And you can give complete path names and say copy from this directory, this partition, to this directory, this partition, where the partition is referenced by the full path name. rm is for remove file. Of course, do that very carefully. Other commands, man is for the manual page. Not much to do with the file system, but many times, many file system commands, you don't remember the options, then using the man command comes in real handy to know what the options are. The one I use a lot is cat for concatenate the contents of the file and display it on the screen. So that's short for dump the entire storage, catenate all the contents together and then bring them to the screen. So that's the cat command, and often we do that to see what are the contents of a file, and then depending on the contents, we'll do all sorts of things. Now, let me move on to the next part out here. Again, those of you who are familiar with Windows or DOS, it's pretty similar. This is an example of a list store out here. On the left-hand side is all the permissions, read, write for the owner of the file, read for the group, read for everybody else. So that's the hierarchy of permissions in Linux. It's always the owner, group, and everybody else. If there's a D in front of it, that means it's a directory file. And then out here is the date that it was modified in. And modern day Linux or terminals add on features which can be turned off, which color code things. It'll color code ordinary files, it'll color code directories, it'll color code /dev files and things like that. So it can do a lot of those things. And depending upon the shell, you can customize it, in any shape or form that you like. Okay, now I will talk a little bit about different kind of file systems, because once you launch into Linux, you will no doubt encounter this. Unlike Windows, we have many choices of file systems. What it really means is, how are the data and the directories internally arranged underneath the covers? Each one has evolved over time in order to provide either large number of files or huge content size of files, or faster access to files and things like that. So over the years, these are the different file systems that have evolved with Linux, and you actually have a choice. Many distros will have a default, but you can always create a different disk, different partition with a different design of a file system layout, and Linux will allow you to mount that partition or disk or device that has a different file system and make it visible and available to you. So some of the old file system structures were called EXT for extent version 2, extent version 3, extent version 4, the journaling file system. Then there was a chap by the name of Paul Reiser, I think. He created his own file system, which is pretty fancy, but then he stopped work on it because of some other issues. And then different developers over the years who created file systems for their product actually then turned around and donated it to open source. So it's now available as an option in Linux. For example, XFS, extended file system, which came from a company called Silicon Graphics, that allow huge number of files and huge size of files and a practically unlimited number of directories and unlimited number of files inside that was possible. That's the design. So for like EX2, EX3, there'll be probably like a limit on how big of a disk partition can it handle, but things like Riser XFS or BTRFS or ZFS have made that possible to have a large number of files, large number of size of files, and large number of physical disk partitions to be added and made to look like a single file structure. The last one, ZFS, the Z here stands for Zeta. You might have heard, mega and tera and peta. And so after that is Zeta. I forget how many zeros there is in the size of the file, but it's pretty big, something like 10 to the 24 zero number of bytes here. So they've changed the design, and when they changed the design to enable large number of files and large file sizes, they also built in features so that they would be more resilient. So in case it detected that, this file got corrupted, it has internal versions of backup copies of these that it can then use to correct the file so that you don't even notice, because it is a given mathematical truism. The more the number of components, the more likely something will go bad. So recognizing that all of these, maybe the last 4 or 5 file systems, have built into their design redundancy and resiliency into that, while allowing for very large files and large file contents so that they're constantly checking and constantly repairing these file systems. And these are available to Linux. That's not the case with many other operating systems or Windows. If there's corruption, then they'll say, well, you should have your own backup. And isn't backup day coming up soon? Well, that's why we have that. But in certain Linux file systems, they do their own correction all the time. And not only that, they've added many features to it, things like compression on the fly that they can do so that you can actually squeeze in more data into your file systems than you thought humanly possible. And then when you reference that file on the fly, it'll uncompress that for you to display the contents. So software compression, software resiliency, and software redundancy is often built into these Linux file systems. And you have to choose them. Usually the default is ext3 or ext4, but which is fine for just the operating system piece or partition, so that it'll boot and get started. Everything else that you mount separate disk partitions can be different file systems. So you can easily add an 8 terabyte file system, make that a ZFS partition, and then it will always do error correction and rebuilding on its own all the time. So that's there. Now, the rest of this is just a quick history of where these older or Linux file system internal structures came from. The EXT, which stands for Extended File System, it actually was developed for a educational Unix-like operating system called Minix, which is invented by a Professor Tannenbaum out in the Netherlands. And the guy who created Linux, Tannenbaum, made the code available to this. So he took that and improved it. That was called EXT. So when he added his features, Linus Torvalds, he called it EXT2. And then people have improved on it by making it faster and more versatile. So you kept getting EXT3, EXT4, and all sorts of additional features. Then pretty soon it became obvious that things will crash. There'll be a power outage, or accidentally, something will happen or get disconnected. So instead of the EXT file system, there's the journaling file system, which was developed by IBM. But then that source code was made available to the open source community. So we have a JFS file system, and it can be created and used. What the journaling file system does is that any changes to the file system are recorded separately, and then once in a while those changes are actually applied. So that if there is a crash, then your file system or disk partition is not corrupted. All you have to do is play the recorded transactions that were kept in a separate file before the crash, and then it can be brought up to date. So this is actually pretty used because it's optimized, and a lot of people like it. And of course, people have improved upon that. For example, the RiserFS, around the same time it came up. What RiserFS does is it works on lots of things at the same time: stability, redundancy, resiliency, extension, large sizes, everything. The only problem is the guy who is developing it, well, he's no longer developing it. And the company that he was working for at that time, SUSE Linux, they were using RiserFS. That's why it's popular in certain places. But then they had to go back when the development stopped on it. XFS is one that I'm familiar with because I've worked on the source code for XFS. this is like a journaling file system. And what its feature way back when, 10, 15 years ago, when it was developed and made available and then donated to the open source community, is that it can do parallel I/O processing, which means that if you're writing to a single file and that file is gigantic, you can get that file to be spread over several hundreds of disks and be writing to it different parts of the disk all simultaneously. When you look at the file, you'll still see only a single file, but you can write or even read different parts of it all at the same time. So that was the beauty of XFS. They later developed CXFS, or cluster, where a file, instead of being on separate disks connected to a single computer, the file can be on separate disks on several computers at the same time. Maybe 100 different computers, and each computer maybe had 20 disk drives attached to it. So you could create a file on all those 20 computers and using all the 20 drives attached to each computer as one single gigantic file. As a matter of fact, it's in use at several thousand places where they do a lot of parallel I/O processing, and that's they use Linux for it because it affords them the option of creating an XFS file system on their disk drives, then mounting it and making it available, which again you don't get to use with Windows. And it's really good because they can park gigantic files out there. NASA does a lot of stuff, not just with space, but Earth observation. They take in readings that come in from satellites at several hundreds of gigabytes a second simultaneous readings, and then they all use XFS to capture all the data. And like I said, it was originally developed by Silicon Graphics, and then later they donated it to Linux out there. And even now today, they still use it at several places. Other contemporary file systems which are available under Linux, for example, the binary tree file system. It has similar features like XFS or ZFS, fault tolerance, easy administration, easy repair, huge storage possible, and you can use it, but they're always making improvements on it. This is more for people who'd like to tinker with stuff, but it's not ready for production yet, which means that in production you can use it and forget about it. It'll take care of itself. There are still some glitches, but a lot of people like it. They often call it the Butter FS or Better FS, but I've used it. It's not bad, and it does have a lot of good features, but you should use it only if you're comfortable with playing around with new stuff. The Zeta file system, or ZFS, was developed by Sun Microsystems for their operating system, and later they donated it to Linux. There's a, well, it's out there and you can still use it. I use it every day at work as well. But then Sun got bought by Oracle, and then Oracle took ZFS and made changes to it. So today there are two versions, the Oracle version and then the open source version. And whenever you use ZFS, you got to be careful. So typically enterprises that use Oracle Linux will use Oracle's version of ZFS, and all the other open source folks who use Linux will use the open source ZFS. That's called OpenZFS, and they've made some really cool improvements to it, and it's suited for places that, for example, the Netflix folks or many cloud vendor storage providers, your Dropbox and folks like that, underneath the covers use OpenZFS because it does its own repair underneath the covers, checksumming, snapshots, recovery, without having to worry about it, because it's self-healing, and it does need CPU horsepower. For example, file systems that have ZFS typically are like 4-core or 8-core systems, where 2-3 cores are devoted to the users doing stuff, and the other cores are keeping an eye on the file system and carrying on repair, kind of like worker cores in the background. So it's usually quite suited for places that have several thousands of petabytes. Remember, Zeta file system is, you know, maybe 10 orders of magnitude higher than the biggest disk drive today. So you can have literally several 100,000 disk drives or solid state storage, and it'll manage it and carry it on all as part of Linux. And of course, people that have like tons of video files that they need to quickly transmit across the internet or capture, they use ZFS a lot. One particular site I remember, it's the NFL, basically the outfit that runs NFL. They have an entire data center, and they use ZFS because they offer a service where what you see NFL games that are broadcast, they actually have 10 times the amount of footage that never gets shown on TV. They have all that footage on large disk farms, and then if you subscribe to that service, you can actually view that footage which they fetch from these disk farms, different angles and stuff like that, and you can watch all of that. So this chap took us on a tour of that, where they're using ZFS underneath the covers, and like I said, 10 times, and they have footage going all the way back many, many years, old film that they then digitally converted into digital format, and then they store it on this, and they don't have to worry about, you know, for example, in Hollywood, a film is a chemical media. It can go bad or deteriorate, or there was a Hollywood studio 4 years ago where they had canisters of film where it caught fire and a lot of archival footage was destroyed. Here, once it's digital, they don't have to worry about it. At the most, they have a second data center far away, which has copies of everything out there. So that's the thing. So when choosing a file system, people should decide, do they want performance, do they want stability, or do they want administration features, or do they want something that in the future, if there are newer storage devices or different kinds of storage media, will it take advantage? That's called future proofing. All of these file systems under Linux offer all of these advantages in some degree or measure, but at least you got all the choices. So really, the sky is the limit when it comes to these file systems. Now, my last slide, I'll just tell you, inside the Linux OS, what you see outlined in the red dotted oval, that's the portion that is the code that actually deals with the file system. And the way that you access it, you know, using your utility, the utility itself is a program that makes a system call, the system call interface, that then makes a call to the virtual file system. This virtual file system is the same across all Linux OSs. And this virtual file system then makes a call to the file system on that partition that was created, either ZFS, XFS, ext2, ext3, ext4. This is where that specific part of that file system is. And these 4 pieces, they can easily be moved in and out of the Linux OS that you need. And some of them include all of them in there, so that simultaneously you can have disk partitions which are ext3, ext4, not at the same time, but different partitions. One is ext3, one is ext4, and one is ZFS. Then it'll have all these layers present in parallel, and then it can use the device driver and the IO scheduler to access it through the physical connection out here. So this is what it looks like inside a Linux OS, a logical view of the file system interface. In case you're playing with a different distro, all of them support ext4, and if that's default, that's fine. If you're not sure, then choose that. If it asks you, if you'd like to experiment, there's the Btrfs. If you want large disk farms, servers, and not worry about anything, ZFS is great. If you have a small disk partition, maybe 1 or 2 terabytes, you can use ZFS, but remember, it will take away anywhere from 10 to 15% away from that 2 terabyte file system to use as repair area. So while it'll reduce your worries of things going bad on that disk drive, it does take away the size. So if you get a 2 terabyte disk drive and then you look at it, you'll be surprised that, oh, why do I have only 1.6 available? Well, the other is used up for the automatic background repair that's going on. And if you want to do something gigantic, like the NASA people, you can choose XFS. So with that, I conclude my talk on Linux file systems, and all of these are available with most 90% of the Linux distros out there. So at this point, I'll take any questions.
Sharan, we don't have time for your questions right now. We'll catch it at the end because Orv needs time to give his presentation.
Sure.
He's been cutting some of it out as we speak.
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, go right ahead. So I've stopped sharing, so you guys can carry on.
Good. And Orv, you can go ahead and start your sharing. I'm really excited that I got the pop-up message earlier that he's with us today. He might look a little bit weak, whatever, but he's a fighter, and we're glad he's here. So, Orv, take it over and give us some hands-on demos for us.
I will attempt to do it. I'm just a little bit fatigued from the second shot. Wife is not faring quite as well, but we'll go with that. Okay. What I'm going to do is see if my slideshow will show up over there. You see the first slide?
Not yet. I see the background.
Oh, I hate that. Stand by.
It's a pretty background.
What do you see now?
Just the nice fog and stuff.
Stand by. I hate that. Let's see, desktop 2. I've got 2 screens here. Stand by.
You can tell he's a ham operator.
Okay, well. Oh, seriously.
I see your window now. Good.
You see the first?
Yes.
First slide? Oh, good. Okay. Sharan has covered a lot of this already, so I'm going to rip through my slides because a few different options and maybe some of the things he glossed over in the interest of time. But then I'll jump into banging around on the command line and doing some demos. So anyway, the command line appears via a separate program. Some people call it a console. It was originally called a shell program. There's a picture of it there. Again, typically the prompt is your login ID at the name of the workstation you're logged in on, and we'll go from there. the original Linux shell was SH shell. And throughout the years, there were various flavors of it. There was and I didn't list it there, a BSH written by a guy named Bourne, B-O-U-R-N-E. But he brought his together with the Ash shell, and it became Bash, the born again shell. So anyway, that's what we're using here. And it's by far the most common shell. And it is pretty much the default on almost all popular Linux distributions today. And Sharan covered this, but the tilde here is your home directory. That's shorthand for your home directory. Go over these real quickly. The difference between Bash and the console. Bash commands and file names are case sensitive. DOS commands are not. A file name with a capital letter is not the same as a file name that begins with a lowercase letter. In Bash, the / character is a directory separator, and the / is an escape character, which we're not going to go into. When they did DOS, and before that even CP/M, they got it backwards. They used the / as the directory separator. / is a command argument or option. You're all familiar with the 8-character dot 3-character for file names in DOS and CP/M, actually, going back even before that. I copied this from somebody else. Bash follows no such convention. While it's true that the command line doesn't care about that, many applications programs, which technically are supposed to figure out what the file is they're working on from the internal header of the program, many of them actually do look at the extension. And I'll show some examples of that later, but those are not mandatory. So PWD, print working directory, you can see I'm in Orv's docs, ham docs with the tilde in front of it. But if you expand it with the PWD, you can see it's actually in my home directory, home O Beach. CDs, change to your home directory. You can see that I was in ham docs and went to CD, and without any options behind it, CD just takes you to your home directory. CD ... change directory up 1 level. And I didn't put it in here, but CD space dash takes you to the directory where you were before. And that's really handy. I forget to use it. LS lists the directory contents. There are tons of options which are called switches sometimes in Unix and Linux. The options for LS always start with a dash, and you can string a number of them together. Here's just a plain old LS command, and you can see the colorations for the different types of files there. ls-l is in columnar format. This is what they call ASCII-batized. Numbers come first and then alphabetized. Sometimes even you will see programs that will list them with numbers first, lowercase letter files first, and then uppercase. So you have 3 sets to look through, but they've pretty much stopped doing that. Wanted to talk, Sharan mentioned it briefly, the weird letters at the left. There's 3 sets of them. Think UGO, user, group, other. And starting with other, read, write, and execute, whether they have it or not. Then there's read, write, execute for the group. And this second column here is the group, and you'll notice I'm the group that owns this, and that's cool. And the colors, colors are not universal, but blue means directories here. Green is executable, and that's a .sh file, a shell file. And in this iteration, which is Ubuntu, by the way, purple, it's chosen to flag pictures, .jpegs as pictures. ls-lt, Sharan showed this in columnar format, newest first. If you put an R in there, it will reverse the format and show the oldest first. Again, in columnar format, ls-l capital S, largest first. And you notice the directors are always shown with 4096 because that's the size of the directory structure, the metadata itself. That's a dead giveaway if you didn't look at the D on the left, that it's a directory, and the coloration. But in any case, you can see that they're all sorted by the file size. Here it's in bytes, which sometimes if they're large, it's hard to figure out how big they are. If you add a lowercase h to that, it converts them to what they call human readable format. Puts megabytes, gigabytes, kilobytes, the letter representing those sizes behind it, and it's much easier to read. So you could actually have an ls minus ltrh. So let's go on to some more. And again, Sharan covered some of these. Make a directory, mkdir. Here's some examples. Make a directory called temp, which will be created right where you're at in the directory. It'll become a subdirectory of the directory you're in. Or you could make a directory not in Orv's, not in the docs directory underneath that, not in the presentations directory under that. You make new dir way down here. So you don't have to go to the directory where you want to make the directory. You can stick it out way out hell and gone, you know, no matter how far this string is. You don't have to go there to make the directory. Remove directory works only if it's empty. I may expound on that when we go live, but rmdir removes empty directories. Here's an example. Remove the same directory I created earlier. Now, this assumes when I'm removing it that I was in the same place when I made it. John, can you see my cursor? Is it wiggling around on the screen? Well, at any case, that's how you remove the directory. You can remove a directory if you're not directly above it, but you have to put the absolute file path, starting with root, home, Beach, Orvs, et cetera, et cetera. The command date just prints the date and time. There are switches, you know, dash, you know, something fairly cryptic to set the date and time from the command line. Copy a file, copy source to destination. There are a few Linux commands that don't obey the source to destination, but most of them are always source to destination. For instance, copy file 1 to file 1.backup. And again, this extension could be whatever you wanted to call it, .bk, .bkup, it's whatever you want to do, but you go from file 1 to file 1.2. Now, file 1 exists, you're just making another copy of it and renaming it. Here's a little bit more complicated. I'm in the directory above the file called pictures, and I'm copying sn9.jpg down to Orv's docs miscellaneous, and it'll wind up in miscellaneous. Now, I could have renamed it at the same time by putting a new file name down here, and it would have copied it and renamed it at the same time. So some more commands. Move a file from source to destination. Here's another one. Move sn9.jpg from the pictures subdirectory down into miscellaneous. Okay, here's where it gets weird. To rename a file, it's not rename, it's move. You move the file from its old name to its new name. So here's what I did. I renamed sn9.jpg, the file with that name that's in pictures, to sn9_old.jpg. Now, if you forget the pictures in the destination, it'll still, instead of renaming it, it will move it and rename it to the directory you're in because you didn't specify pictures. So you got to be careful about your paths and your file names. So here's another one that isn't exactly a command. If you want to retype the last command, use the up arrow, and that goes up a long ways. There's a huge history file. I'll show that if I remember when we go live. So some more. The man pages, Sharan talked about this. The man pages, for instance, man ls, are extremely comprehensive. So much so that they're almost unreadable. Oftentimes it's easier to just Google the command, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But the man pages, if you're looking for something very, very specific and oddball, that's where you look for it. But again, Google will probably give you multiple examples. Okay, when you're in the man page, let me go through here. There we go. Okay, when you're in the man pages, and they could be multiple screens, you can use the up arrow and the down arrow to scroll through it, or you can use the page up and page down, go screen at a time. If you want to search for a specific string that you're looking for, the / and the string searches down into the file for that. And by the way, if you hit it again, it will remember what you were looking for. So you can just use the / multiple times if there's multiple instances of the text you're looking for until you find what you're looking for. Similarly, question mark in the text will search backwards. And you can do a question mark if you happen to be in the bottom of the file and you want to search upwards towards the beginning. And again, Q to quit. So let me get this on here. Sharan had mentioned cat, and cat works very well for putting a text file on the screen, but unless you tell it otherwise, it will put all of it on the screen and you will end up with the last screen's worth on the screen. Less lets you view a text file and search through it, very similar to the man pages. Up arrow, down arrow, page up, page down to scroll through it. / to search forwards for text, question mark to search backwards for text, and Q to quit. So something else to copy and paste. Almost all UIs, I use KDE Plasma, and all of the others, if you highlight text and right click to bring a menu up, there'll be a copy command there you can click on, put your cursor on the destination, then you right click the menu and paste. It's pretty much like Windows. Oops, I just right clicked. Or you can highlight the text, and you may know that in DOS, you can do a Control-C, Control-V. Well, on the Unix command line, it's Control-C. So you need Control-Shift-C to copy and Control-Shift-V to paste. I don't use that too often. There's a better way to do it, and that's the Linux way. Here's how it works. I'll demo this. You highlight the text, that copies it into a separate copy buffer. Then you go down to where you want to paste it and click the scroll wheel, and that will paste it. Poof, done. And I'll show you some examples of that. Very handy. And that's not just on the command line. If you want to copy and paste something within LibreOffice or a spreadsheet or something like that, it'll work there too. Okay, references. That compressed URL there, the bit.ly URL, 3R, capital ER, capital J, 6F, is compressed. It'll take you to a web page where I got most of these from. It has a few more that I chose not to talk about. Or you can just Google Linux, the command name, and examples, and you'll get 6 or 8 or 10 or 20 or 100 pages with command examples. And if you don't find the exact example you're looking for, just keep looking through Google. I'd be ashamed to admit how often I look at, use Google, because a lot of these commands you only use, you know, every few months. And what was that switch that does that? So anyway, we'll do some demos and things here. Let me do that. Let me do this. You still see my screen, I hope. There we go. Okay, so here's my console. In KDE Plasma, the console is called console with a K.
Yeah, or if you might want to go in, and enlarge the font size for us.
Oh, I can easily do that.
I knew you could.
Settings, edit current profile, appearance. Let's see, let's go to, is that any better? Does it need to be larger? We can go big.
We like to see big. We're old.
Tell me about it. Stand by. My mouse is fighting me. There we go. How's that?
How about a little bigger?
Seriously? Okay.
Yeah.
There we
Okay.
go.
All right.
I'll just make it bigger. How's that?
Well, it's the text more than the terminal size.
Okay. Where am I? I'm in my home directory. It's there, home Orv Beach. Okay. Here's the stuff in my home directory. I showed this in a screenshot. Blue for directories. But why is the one labeled Orvs got a green background? Well, let me show you. There's another command called df, which is disk free. And it will go through all of the partitions it knows about and list them and their sizes. And I'm going to use the -H for human readable because some of them are big. Okay, there's the file system. Most of this you don't care about. Here's the root directory. It's 230 gigs right here. 160 gigs available. And that's okay. What's all this stuff down here? Well, what these are is, these are directories mounted on these mount locations on my computer from the file server over here on my network. So all of these are not on this computer that I'm giving this presentation on. They're sitting over on the file server. But this computer, the operating system, doesn't know about that. All it knows is if I go to /photos here, I'll go to the /photos directory. It doesn't know that it's a top level mount. So but it does know here that it's not on this machine. It gives you the green background, which is pretty cool. Now, I've got all this junk on the screen, and to clear the screen, the cryptic command is clear. So what was I going to show? Let's see, ls minus lshr. Okay. Well, I told it to do it in reverse, and then I told it to sort it by size. So I don't know what it did. It sorted it by size. Anyway, what were some of the other things I was going to, I had all these genius things. Well, let's go cd to Orvs. Now I'm in Orvs. Now you can do cd space. If you're not sure what it is, do tab, and it'll show you all the directories underneath you. So I want to go to, say, docs. What's under here? I could just do ls minus l. That's okay. Or I could go tab. And let's go into ham docs. So these are subdirectories. Now, here's a PDF file. You'll notice it's green. Well, green means executable, and it's not. So I should probably fix that. And I'm just going to do this. I don't expect you to remember it, but this file is not set up the way it really should be. Because it says that all of the users on my system can read it, can write it. You can't execute a PDF, it wouldn't run. But with the write privilege right here, they could erase it. So remember I told you about Hugo? I'm going to change the group's permissions. Let me think here. Minus G. Minus G says take away write and execute from, and another thing, I'm typing then. Tura. It doesn't do it. Well, here, this is even better. Let's see if I get this right. I'm going to highlight this like that. I'm going to press the, go down here and press the scroll button. Poof. I wonder if I got the command right. Nope. Anyway, I'll do that later. But anyway, the point being, you can look at the permissions over here. So I'm going to clear the, okay.
Give you a clue.
Another
You have making directory and removing directories and copying, pasting.
Very good. Thank you. CD space takes me to my home directory. I'm going to make a directory called temp. Oh, of course, you notice mkdr isn't correct. So I'm going to use the up arrow to recall the command, scroll over, put in the I, boom. Now I've made a directory called temp, and you can see it right here. You'll notice over here, it gave the group all the permissions. That's not a bad thing because I'm the only one in this group. So I'm going to remove the directory. Actually, I'm going to change to temp. I'm going to create an empty file. There's a command called touch. Touch test. And you can see here's an empty file called test. What good is that? Well, sometimes it's good to have an empty directory for testing. If you touch an existing file, it will update the timestamp on it to the current date and time. So anyway, I'm going to go up here and I'm going to remove the directory temp. Oops, not directory. So I'm going to rm/temp/ I'm going to type a T. Why doesn't that work? Tab fulfillment doesn't work. Oh, that's why it's not temp. See, it won't let you make things bad, you know, wrong. Also, I'm in there, so I can't use the root or the / because temp is right where I'm at. No, it is temp. That's why. Okay, so what I did wrong was I said, look, starting with the top root directory for something called temp. Well, it's not in the top directory. It's right where I'm at. So I didn't need the /. So I can remove that and it's gone. Now I can do and we check and lo and behold, temp is gone. Okay, let's see. I'm going to cat tt.sh. Normally I'd use less, but since tt.sh is only 35 bytes, I know it'll stay on the screen. And it's an executable with a cd command and then if I do this, I'll do copy and paste. Right click, copy, down here, right click, paste. And because I had a carriage return after it, it executed that command that I pasted. So we're there. So it would run this command, but it would only run it because I have it flagged as executable. And it knows that because it's green. If I tried to do by the way, when you tell it to run something, you have to say, let me rewind. In the DOS days, and there still are, they have a search path, which is a list of all of the directories the OS should look for to find an executable. Well, I have the same thing in Linux. It's set up in your home profile. It tells you, I don't know, look through user bin first, and then look for, user local bin, and there's like generally 6 or 8 common search directories in your search path. You can modify that if you want, if you have a special place, but you can always run an executable by prefacing it with the actual search path. Well, let's see, if I say run.sh, I don't know if I want to do that or not. It went and looked through the search path. But if I do this, what it means, // means look for it right here. But I don't want to run it because it'll start something that might interfere with the presentation. Okay, we're home again. So the other copy and paste I did was I highlighted it here rather than, after I've highlighted it, rather than right click, mouse button, and then hit enter. And now you're in the home Orv Beach TT/client. Excuse me.
Or how about you talked about the making directory, mention my favorite about multiple directories creating.
I haven't used that. Temp 1, temp 2, like that?
Yep.
And you can see them there. And I could remove them like this, temp 1. Let's do this. I want to make sure, let's talk about wildcards. When you want to say, for instance, I want to list everything with 1 additional character behind it, you could do that. Or you could do temp *, which means 1 or more characters, and it shows like that. Now I could do rmdir temp 1, temp 2, temp 3, but I could just do this. Hold on. Be careful with using wildcards. Do a list command of the things you want to remove first before you actually remove them. Make sure you haven't actually included something like temp 9 or temp test if you used a wildcard. Everybody needs to keep their workstations patched. You need to keep them current. Almost all of us use, I imagine most people use the graphical utility. When it says you have updates, you just click and it goes away. But there are times when you want to use the command line. Different distros use, there's 2 or 3 different update commands, but almost all of us use either Debian or something derived from Debian. Ubuntu, Kubuntu, Mint, and there's a whole bunch of others. And that command is called apt. And for those, there's a 2-step command. You update the list of all of the, you go out to the internet, to one of the mirror repositories, and you pull in the list of all of the current versions of the programs on your system. That way, when it decides to upgrade, it can pull in the newer versions. So you do an apt update. It errored out. Why was that? It's because I'm not root. I'm a common ordinary user. So I could do up arrow, put the sudo command here, and it again, it wants to make sure I'm it. There we go. And what it's doing, it's just going out to all of the repositories that contain all of the programs that I use here. And there's nothing to do because everything's up to date. But if there was, I just do this and you're done. And notice it didn't ask me for sudo again because it remembers for a while that you can you have sudo privileges. So my wife has a workstation. It's over here about 5 feet away, but it's running Fedora, which runs not apt, but something called DNF. So to upgrade it, I could go over there, log her out, log me in, open up console, and run the DNF update. But instead of doing that, I'll run Secure Shell, which is a way of logging into remote computers. This is called SC, which is short for stupid computer, because that's what she called it when we were switching her from Windows to Linux many years ago. And you can see that the prompt changed. I'm now at SC. Why didn't it ask me for a password? SSH commands require a password. I have an Orv Beach account on her end. Otherwise, I couldn't log in on her system. Additionally, I'd have to type my password in. The reason I didn't have to is a thing called SSH keys. You can create them on your system and send the public key over to any destination computer that you're going to log into. And from then on, it'll recognize the keys and log you in without a prompt. So I could do this for her. DNF is different. The update will pull in the new file versions and then upgrade. Yep, I'm not. This particular system, I have not set up sudo. So I will switch to root with the super user command. Or actually, nowadays it stands for switch user. But if I don't put anything after the dash, it assumes I'm going to switch to root. And there's a separate root command there. Now I can do DNF update. And notice I'm 5 feet away from her computer. And sure, I'm going to apply all of those upgrades. And this looks pretty much like what you'd see with apt. Now, it's just as easy to use the GUI, but if you have to get up and walk out to your workshop or someplace remote, it's far easier to do the commands logged in remotely. So while that's running, we will add a new tab. There. Now notice I have 2 tabs down here. Most of the consoles will let you create new windows like this. Now see, I have 2 windows, or you can do it with 2 tabs. And you can see over here in the one marked SC down in the corner with purple, it means there's been text placed on that console window since I left it. There it is right there. So I'm going to exit out of that, exit out of that. Now I'm at my original window. And by the way to close a console window, you could grab your mouse and go up to the upper right corner and click the X, or you could just type exit, which ends the program, the console program. This is the other tab. And this is the one I opened up separately. Confused yet? While I was talking about SSH, I mentioned it was handy for remote computers. This one's really remote. This is my cloud server. I have no idea where. I think it's physically located in the Bay Area someplace. Or if you've been playing with Raspberry Pis, they don't come with SSH server set up by default, but you can create it. Okay, now I'm logged into a Raspberry Pi in my workshop, and I could do the same Linux commands. You know, it's the size of half the size of a pocketbook, and you can do all the same Linux commands. So using Linux command line is really, really handy. There are all sorts of application-specific commands too. Some of them they're, the zip and unzip and tar, which is an older form of file compression. So here's all of the, oh, let me show you something. ls-l, and we went way past. I can do this, up arrow to retrieve. This vertical line, which is sometimes above the 1, on mine it's above the backslash. In the Linux and Unix world, that's known as a pipe. And it redirects the output of this command, ls-l, to whatever you type here. And there's an old version of the less command called more. It lets you scroll through a text file or anything, but only from top to bottom. You can't go back. That's why it's fallen out of favor compared to less. But it's handy because when you're streaming something to the screen, like this huge file listing, you can pipe it to more and it'll show you screen at a time. Spacebar, 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 spacebar. By the way, these are in user bin. You can see by that. So these are all executables. They may not necessarily be executables that a user might use, but if a program that you install has multiple executables it uses, it may put them in user bin. Sharan had mentioned opt, and I went and looked in opt, /opt, and sure enough, Skype for Linux, Zoom, Rocket Chat, which is a chat client, Mattermost is up here, that's another chat client. Here's what I'm going to do, ls-l opt/Google. All right, go up again, /Chrome. And here's all of the Chrome programs. You can see Chrome at the very top there. So rather than being user bin or user local bin or a couple of others, Google has chosen to put their programs in /opt, like Sharan mentioned. Let me show you something else. He mentioned the temp directory. Here's my temp directory. Some stuff in there from root, stuff from Orv Beach. He mentioned that people used to use it as kind of your junkyard. Just throw stuff in there. But you could end up, if it was part of your root partition, you'd end up filling your root partition and then you couldn't log in. Or if you made it a separate partition, you couldn't save anything over there anymore. And programs that you run oftentimes put their transient stuff, that stuff that disappears after you close the program, in /temp because they don't care. But what Ubuntu does, and I assume everything from Debian on down does, when you reboot, it cleans temp out. You'll notice all of these have the same date, like today. So don't put anything in temp and expect it to be around. So what I did was, this is the top level directory. See, pwd, and the / is called root. You can see this scratch directory here, owned by me. It's not on this server. It's over on the file server, /scratch. And there's all sorts of junk in here. Stuff that I used once and I don't care if it goes away. It shares everything on the file system. You can see it right here with all of our photos, graphics, is my wife's stuff. That's my stuff here. Notice this is not mounted at the top level. It's mounted down in home Orv Beach. But the point being, all of them have 2.4 terabytes available because they share the same volume on the file server that it called volume 1. It's a 3 gig file server, has 2 3 gig drives up there. They're mirrored, they're identical copies. So if one dies, you'll still be able to run it and replace the fail drive on the fly, and it'll rebuild the mirror. Very, very handy. Highly recommended. I leave very little of importance on this workstation. If it crashed, I'd be annoyed, but I wouldn't lose anything critical. John, any other suggestions for commands? What did I miss that people use a lot?
I think you did pretty good, because they have the handout they'll get that'll review with them what you've
good.
done.
Excellent.
And we'll come back. We're going to do another command line in May. So Orv will put together the next level and stuff like that. I think
Somebody raised their hand.
Yeah. We're not going to give out too much stuff because of the time. So if we have those questions that you've put into the chat box, we will definitely get them both to Sharan and to Orv, and any leftovers to me to do that. So I think we want to kind of hold it off this time because we are at the 2:30 hour. And I appreciate Orv being sick and not making me do his presentation. And I don't know if there's anything else. I'll remind everybody that we have recorded this. This will be saved so you can be able to watch it later. And then in the future, groups will be able to watch parts of this. Judy, anything last from you? I think that it's been a good one. We've learned a lot of information. Next month, it's going to be customizing your desktop. I'm hoping to get a couple more people. I'm looking for someone who is a maybe Ubuntu Mate user that will join our team to show us how you customize to make it really, really good. But we're going to have at least 4 different desktops and people showing you how they took a plain default desktop and souped it all up. Judy?
I have a few questions. Can we open it up for about 10 minutes if anybody has any live questions?
Give me 1 second.
And please use the raise hand feature under reactions. Oh, cool. Thomas Holsterberg is standing in front of a green sign. Very good.
Okay, Murray, unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I was just going to say that.
Murray, you're too loud again.
Yeah, Murray, no comments, just questions.
Yeah, I was going to ask about the find command for maybe next time. That would be for Orv. Sorry, for
We'll talk about
Orv.
that.
Okay,
we'll
thanks.
talk about that, and we'll talk about a better find command.
Okay, thank you.
John, you're on. Please unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm really quite, I know DOS very well because I used it for many years, and I see a lot of similarity. So I'm picking it up, but I really am a novice Linux user. I'd like to start practicing on some things here. Is there a way I can make my my Windows run Linux? Is there such a thing?
Oh, yes.
There is. I assume it's Windows 10. The Windows subsystem for Linux, WSL. Go search for WSL2, install it, boom, you'll have a command line under, well, it'll ask you which distro you want. You can just tell it Ubuntu. Currently, it doesn't natively run a UI. You have to kind of jump through hoops to get a UI started. Microsoft has promised to fix that, but you'll get a fully functional command shell.
Okay, thank you very much. I know that I could have done it with a virtual machine, but this is Windows Home and not the version that'll run it.
Yeah, WSL2 should install just fine.
You're on.
Did you say me? For those people that are Windows users that would like to play with Linux, pick up a Raspberry Pi. You can be running Linux for $50.
It's amazing how useful they are, and they have hardware things to stack on them. It's a huge, I was gonna say mini industry, but it's not mini anymore. Recommended. Or any old junker computer you have laying around will be at least as good as a Raspberry Pi. There you go.
If your group has not had a Raspberry Pi presentation, if you have a member who knows what they're doing with it, they are really, really interesting. except it would kind of be hard now that we're not meeting in person. But my group had one, I'm going to say 5 years ago. And we owed, nod, and carried on at this tiny little thing that was sitting on the table in front of us.
That's not a limitation. You can easily use VNC and screen sharing and present your Raspberry Pi screen to everybody. Piece of
Guys
cake.
who do Raspberry Pi, you've got a presentation for your group.
Yeah, I've got 5 of them out on my ham radio network sitting on mountaintops doing telemetry, headless.
Outstanding. Okay, I do not see any more raised hands, Mr. Kennedy. Thank you again for doing what you do, and you too, Bill. Appreciate you both doing the green bit for me. And do your closing, my dear.
Yep. I want to thank Sharan and Orv as part of our team for presenting Linux. And hopefully, I can tell you right now that I know that Murray's going to be part of the team next month doing a customization. Don't forget, we have other workshops coming up in the next 2 Wednesdays and next month. Make sure that you tell your members, pass the word for the registration on to them so they can get registered. Otherwise, we'll see you next week or next month for Linux. Judy?
I'm looking for people who would like to demo their favorite backup program at the March 31st backup workshop in honor of World Backup Day. And you all have my email address, and I'm looking forward to those of you who are brave enough to volunteer to give a 15-minute overview of why you love your backup program. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And again, you will receive an email if you attended today. Those that registered and didn't attend, they lose out. But Judy will send out a link to our private viewing of this workshop along with the 3 handouts that went along with them. And that'll come out shortly. So if nothing else, thank you so much. Look forward to seeing you and more people next month, because it'll be a lot of fun to see how people customize and do all their stuff to their desktop to make them really enjoyable, help their workflow and all of that. See you all later.